meeting this morning. Apologies, we have an apology for Alistair Giverson.
I'll move it.
Moved by Neville, seconded by Jeremy. All in favour say aye.
Aye.
Declarations of interest. We made aware of any this morning. Public forums, petitions, deputations. We don't have any this morning. Confirmation of minutes. Somebody like to the minutes are a children's rec record, which are actually the quite fulsome submissions that Jan managed to give us. Moved by Jeremy, seconded by Morris. All in favour will say aye. Aye. Questions? I haven't been made aware of any questions this morning. Move to reports. So 8.1 is deliberations on page 27, and I'll hand over to Rachel. This morning.
Thank you, Chair. So following on from last week's hearing, the session today is the deliberations on the submissions that received both on the river management funding review and on the 2025-26 fees and charges schedule. Staff have prepared some information to support the deliberations, which is what you'll find in the report. Essentially, what we were proposing to do, having had discussions with the Chair, is a short recap on the process to date and then focus on key issues before going through each of the individual submissions briefly one by one. So what I would propose is that recommendations 1, 2 and 3 be moved, and then we'll go into that presentation and consideration of matters raised by submitters before coming back and considering recommendations 4 to 8.
I'll move recommendations 1 to 3, Chair.
Moved by Eric, seconded for that, seconded by Lyndall. Any discussion? The recommendation, all in favour will say aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Okay, so brief recap, and apologies to those of you that attended the public meetings because some of this will seem very familiar, but just wanting to, I guess, remind councillors of the process and the key matters that were considered through to the period that we're in now. So really with the river management rating review, the journey started with the phase 1 process back at the time of the last long-term plan. So phase 2 is the second part of that review of the rating system. And as you all know, the rating system for river management flood protection was developed decades ago, and at the time of the first rating review, Council looked at whether the system was fit for purpose and concluded that it didn't support coordinated investment in regional resilience or allow for region-wide management of the river network, didn't necessarily support the use of some of the new methods and tools available, or enable a fair and equitable way of rating across all ratepayers. So there were some changes made through that phase 1 process, which I'll come to in a moment. But the river management component was outstanding following that phase 1 process, and that council signalled that they would do further community consultation and engagement over this last year before making a final decision. So just in short, the key decisions that were made, so starting with catchment planning, and you might recall that you agreed to a 2-year transition. So like this year is currently year 1 of that 2-year transition, and it's gone straight from the previous system to 100% general rate based on capital value, and no changes proposed to that for next year. River management, as I alluded to, is the one where you agreed to do further consultation and to make a final decision on that this year. At present, and how the rates were struck for the current year, it's a 50% targeted rate based on land value and a 50% general rate based on capital value. And just to remind you that prior to the changes that were introduced last year, it used to be a 70% targeted rate based on land value and a 30% general rate, which of course is based on capital value. So we've moved some distance already this year, and you're making the decisions essentially today about where this lands for the future. The third component that we went through last year was the flood infrastructure investment, and so a new rate was established as part of the phase 1 process, and that is 100% targeted rate across the region based on capital value, and again no change for next year. And the last piece of the puzzle last year was that discussion about the biosecurity and land sustainability rates, and again a transition away from a land value rate to capital value rate, which is occurring over a 2-year process. So that was where you got to last year, and river management focus for today, just highlighting obviously the YL exclusion, which is to do with the YL agreement that's in place between Meridian, ourselves and the catchment liaison committees, and how that catchment's funded slightly differently. So what is river management? Just really briefly, because I'm aware that you're very familiar with this. It's one of our 4 flood protection and control activities, and it's all about keeping those river channels clear and protecting and stabilising the banks. This is just highlighting and reminding you of the rating system that has been in place for many years. So the coloured blocks on the left are the current rating districts. And as you can see, I guess the key point to note is that some areas are outside of current rating districts. So the system that has been in place for many years does not currently rate all of the region for those activities. And as you all know, the closer you are to the river, the more you pay in terms of the current or previous rating system of 140 catchment rates. And also, this will be familiar to you. It's from some of our consultation material, but just highlighting the importance of our flood protection and river management activities to our critical infrastructure and the linkages across the region. So I know we've spoken about this at length previously, but the regional benefit that is associated with our flood protection and river management activities. So briefly, the options that went out for consultation, option 1, a regional rate, and this was your preferred option. So 100% targeted regional rate based on capital value. Second option was a regional local rate, which was a mix of 70% targeted regional rate based on capital value and 30% targeted local rate based on capital value. And the third option is, if you like, status quo, what we're in at present in the current year. So for option 2, those were the areas, and just wanted to talk briefly on the engagement with the catchment liaison committees, which we'll come back to in deliberations. So there were some meetings with the catchment liaison committees in March, specifically where some alternative options were put forward. In particular, the catchment liaison committees at that time were asking us to model for the Oriti a further breakdown where Invercargill, Waihopai was split out, Makarewa was split out, and then the rest of the Oriti in another rating district. So that modelling was done. The other part that was put forward was what would it look like if it was 100% targeted rate. And so we did the financial analysis and modelling. You may recall a council workshop on this late March, and that modelling was all shared with the catchment liaison committees via email at that time. It came in mid-April and had a discussion with us on that. We've got the 2 submissions, one from the Mataura Catchment Liaison Committee and one from the Oriti. And as signalled in the Mataura submission, the feedback from that committee anyway was that the regional approach was reluctantly supported, having seen the modelling. And so the modelling is outlined in the other options section of the statement of proposal for the river management funding review. So I've got copies of this if anyone wants to refresh their memories on that. But basically, the modelling showed that instead of smoothing out the rates, it would have created quite a different effect. So just talking about the three options, and then I will come back to that. As you can see, for option one, you've got an equal amount of river management rates being paid relative to the value of the property. So these graphs are showing the amount of rates paid per 100k of capital value. So you can see that for the different groups of ratepayers, it's $11 per 100k of capital value that we're paying for river management rates. And just a reminder that total sum that we're seeking to raise through this particular rate is around $3.5 million, and that's the river management activity. For option two, a little more variation, but for residential rates, it is $10 on average per 100k of capital value, whereas for the rural sector or groupings of ratepayers, it's 13 and commercial 9. Option three is showing the current year, the status quo, and how that looks, so a bit more variation again. And fair to say with the options that I've just spoken about that came through from the catchment liaison committees, there was even further variation.
Rachel, you spoke about the Mataura CLC, for example, not really clear on what they wanted, is it? But you're saying, sort of reading between the lines, that they, what was the word you gave, an indication? Was it?
So we will come to their submission. They do say it's about bullet point 3 or 4 in their submission that they reluctantly accept, and they call it the district-wide proposal, but what they're talking about is they reluctantly accept option 1, but they have raised many other matters which some relates to the rating review, others are more around the operation of the catchment liaison committees, and again we'll come
It's reasonably clear then.
Robert.
Thank you, Rachel. Could I also ask, just looking at those three graphs, particularly number 1, where we've smoothed everything to the $11, it looks as if you were looking at that graph and thinking that it represented democratic voice, would it look the same? And is there any way of comparing I don't know how to say this, the value, or an equivalent graph that shows people who are paying the same, having the same voice on these particular issues. I don't know if it is possible, but they should match, basically.
I think that's a really good point for the discussion we've got coming up around the role of catchment liaison committees, which was one of the key themes, and I know it came through the hearing last week about representation on those committees, and whether the committees were open to having additional representation on them.
So it's a good discussion, but I just wonder, is it possible to have a visual that would equate these three groups, which might convey that information?
That's something we could do some work on and bring back for you to make when you're making your final decisions on these.
We've got Morris and John.
Well, actually, Mr. Chairman, that's already up there. The right-hand graph shows the current representation, and the catchment liaison committees have much more of an influence than either the commercial or the residential ratepayers. So that's what it's like at the moment.
Yes.
If we go to option 1, the regional rate, that's what it ought to be, with each of those groups having equal representation. But dare I say it, the catchment liaison committee want us to go to option 1 and keep option 3 in terms of the representation. That might be a little bit hard to be on, but
I've got John, then Jeremy.
Yeah. Look, it's a chicken and egg scenario. It's as simple as that. So I think when the whatever proposal's chosen, that will activate people to get involved. Is the way I see it. So it should get that's the position we're in, and we're in a system of change, and yeah, it's like it improves the whole system. So,
Jeremy?
I'm just trying to understand what are we talking about representation? You're talking about representation around the council or the community representation in these committees? Because at the end of the day, anyone can go on those committees. It's open, it's advertised. So I'm just trying to work out what representation you're talking about. I'm just clarifying this. Sounds like politics is working here. I know it's election year and things coming up, but it just seems that we're not necessarily. It's a different topic, isn't it? Just
It's related, but we could probably talk about this a bit later.
Paul?
I understand what you're saying, Jeremy and Morris, but ultimately at the end of the day, who puts a hand up for a role is the one who has the voice. And how do we get residential to have more input with regards to river management? Do we ask for community boards to join, or do we not involve ourselves with that? That's the question. It's going to be democratic to a certain extent. And whether it is or whether it isn't at the moment is for us to all personally debate.
Peter?
It's good conversation going on. Well, I'm not going to argue with the man in the tie like that. I'm not going to argue with you.
Well, you're not
You're gonna
wearing
argue with
a
me.
nice tie like Morris's.
I shouldn't talk about people's ties. But what I would say is that do we enable that representation, or we just let it lie and see that the increased rating burden should activate people in urban areas? Or do we actively go out and enable that further representation? I think that's the question.
That's right.
No, I think, we haven't finished our deliberations, but if that's where we land, I think some of the points around the table are well made, that there should be more opportunity for urban people to actually go to those meetings and be involved. The reality is the old system, the people that turned up lived on Riverbank basically were pretty close to it. What we're actually proposing is that everybody contributes, everybody benefits. And I think if that's where we land, I think there needs to be a bit more work done. The community boards invitation would be quite good, but something going out to urban people saying this is about everybody. You indicating?
Yeah. And there's a third leg to that, which is commercial.
Yeah.
And ultimately, at the end of the day, we've got one catchment that has an individual, an agreement that's extremely long in the tooth and needs revisited. So that's possibly, we want representation from all three areas, but we currently have one model that has representation from one commercial stakeholder over top of a lot of other. So there's some negatives as well as positives in trying to influence or trying to improve the representation from urban, rural and commercial, because we have one situation where it's not, in my opinion, not feasible.
Yeah, just a point of order, Chairman. Can we perhaps hear the rest of the presentation so that we can then enter the debate that we've kind of entered already?
I think it's a good point, because we're actually debating something we haven't decided on just yet. So we'll back to Rachel.
So as we've already touched on, in terms of key matters raised on the rating review, the role of the catchment liaison committees going forward was a key matter raised by submitters. Another matter was the robustness of the engagement and consultation process, and then other submitters querying whether the preferred option was the most equitable. We have included some data analytics just on the pie graph down the bottom there, which is showing out of the submissions, there was a majority support. The teal was showing option one. It's possibly a little bit hard to read, and particularly the screen has just cut out.
It's fine.
It's back.
And it's okay online.
So yes, you can see the second number there is the orange, which is the option. There are actually other suggestions. You've got, where is it? Option 2 is the light blue for those of you wondering which one that was, and then option 3 is the pink, and that's the current rating scheme. The other consultation we were running was the fees and charges schedule, and the key concerns raised there were increasing costs and affordability, and a number of submitters spoke to the new gravel monitoring charge. So the report that was sent out last week contains some high-level responses to those matters, and then there's the detail of the individual submissions and draft staff responses to those. Would you like to talk about the key matters generally before we go into the individual submissions, or go through the individual submissions first, Chair?
What's the feeling around the table?
I think if we go through the individual submissions, Chairman.
Yeah.
will identify
I would support that.
Consensus on that?
So turning to page 31 of your agenda. First of all, we have the submissions on the river management funding review. So the first submitted there is Martin Gledhill. The submitter is asking for another option in this case, so a 20% general rate and an 80% targeted rate. And obviously made a number of comments at the hearing, highlighting the key points and particularly the impact of humans on the environment. It's recommended the council thanks the submitter for their submission and notes the submitter's comment. It's noted that the combination they've put forward of a 20% general rate and 80% targeted rate would change the distribution of rates in a similar manner to the 100% targeted rate, which is discussed elsewhere in the tables. During the process leading up to consultation, council did not consider those types of options achieved an equitable allocation of rates in a way that's reflective of the benefit that all stakeholders receive from river management activity. Turning to page, oh actually, is there anything you wish to discuss in that particular submission?
And Lyndall?
Sorry, Chairman, just a process question regarding how you intend to, what's the process for actually going through each of these?
Well, I think do we accept the staff recommendation or not? We've got the option of saying yes, we're
On
reasonable.
the response.
Yes.
Yeah. So is that, that's, are we all clear about that? Thank you.
Are we going to do that for each one, or are we going to do it cumulatively? There might be some that we agree with and some we don't.
Right, yeah, I think we do. That's why I suggested to Rachel earlier, I think we need to go through page by page, so there's an opportunity for comment on each one. There's some that have the same response and it may move on quite quickly, but I think we've got time. There's not a lot of submissions to actually do it on the page by page. So I'm getting the impression that people are reasonably comfortable with the staff response to the first one. Okay, move to.
If I'm not, I'll put my hand up.
Chairman, do we have to approve each one individually? Like, do we have to move a motion for each response?
So the recommendations, once we go through them, so really what we'd like to identify here is if there's anything you particularly want added or changed as we go through the staff responses. The recommendations is where you'll make a decision on the final option that you would like for the rating system going forward. And then there's a direction to staff to prepare responses to submitters based on the deliberations process. So we'll then update these responses with anything additional that you would like added and provide that to submitters.
Is that clear?
Comfortable with that?
Yeah, that's all good.
Let's move to the second submission,
Yes, which is the Mataura Catchment Liaison Committee. So many matters raised in the submission, and just noting that this is a summary, the table of the full submission, so you may also wish to refer back to the full submission. So first of all, the committee were highlighting they didn't feel that some key questions had been responded to, raising a number of concerns around the process and about the new rating system options. And then lastly, coming through with a series of key points. So I might just work through each of them in turn. So again, recommended that council thanks the submitter for their submission and notes their comments. So what we have done as staff is identify that option 1, subject to a number of caveats, was supported, and a wide range of matters raised, not all of which pertain directly to the consultation and the rating system review, but as I've already spoken about, wider matters. So just in terms of the consultation and engagement concerns, noting that the process actually began with the phase 1 rating review that was consulted on last year. The report, the front end of the report, talks about the engagement and consultation that has occurred as part of phase 2. So just to remind councillors that there was the engagement period, and so some of that was the events we attended over the summer, the AMP shows, etc. And then there was the formal consultation period. So quite a number of activities occurred across both of those phases, and Phil is here and is very happy to speak to some of that work that's been done, and you're very welcome to dig into that if you would like to. Maybe Phil, if you just wanted to outline briefly the engagement and consultation processes, and then we can respond to any questions you've got.
Well, councillors, through you, Mr. Chair. I think, as Rachel's mentioned, we started obviously last year with the first phase of the rating review, talking about as a whole, and you remember last year we got in excess of 300 submissions around the whole process, so there was a lot of feedback there. Coming into this year, our first focus was reminding people of where we were at with phase 1 going into phase 2. So in November, December, we used the CLC AGMs as meetings to catch people up with the process. Then we signalled where we were going forward. And then we used EnviroSouth, we used various council publications. And then coming into March and April, we went through the AMP shows, so we did some pre-engagement, and then into the consultation phase during April. So there's a report there outlining all the activities across all the different platforms. So involving emailing, did a lot of direct emailing to databases, to CLC members, to chairs. Big emphasis was trying to get the information in front of people as soon as we could. So I think we had the council meeting on February 4th, where we did an initial discussion around the options. So we wanted to keep people as informed and as up to date as we could. Then going through April, we obviously distributed all the consultation documents around the libraries, the service centres, using all the different platforms, advertising and the big papers, the small papers. You might have seen ads pop up on Stuff, digital ads there. And then also the likes of Western Star, those smaller publications, just trying to get in front of people. We used our rates database, which is about 7,500 emails, to let people know about the proposals. And emailing all our gravel consent holders. So that's around the fees and charges schedule, which we'll talk about later. We put ads across a lot of commercial, so we did Chamber of Commerce, tried basically essentially covering our bases. Radio, and Jane's put together a really good report around the digital metrics. So you can see, have a look through that yourself, and happy to take any questions on that. There's some really good numbers there. Click through, CTA equals click through rate, understanding that. So if you've got any questions around those, yeah, I think we went to the community notice boards, which of course now is a big way of getting eyeballs on things. So, and that to a degree is determined. We don't run those groups, so obviously we can get asked to be part of those and we can get those ads in front of people, but obviously we don't have the control over running them. So, yeah. So essentially we've tried to cover our bases. We think we've put the blanket as wide as we can in terms of consultation and engagement. We've obviously been to 3 meetings as well in mid-April. Yeah, there's a lot going on in April. A lot of councils are obviously doing consultation. And I think one of the submitters did mention that in their submission. So yeah, and we think we've given really given the ratepayers reasonable access to the information. So happy to take any questions.
All right, Peter, Robert, Paul. Peter.
Thanks very much, Phil. It's very difficult nowadays to have a reach, isn't it? And how do we do that? I think you've covered a lot of bases. Probably see the days of the big shared meetings and the big hall meetings for this stuff are probably gone. See David Rose and Hugh Gardine always saying we need a big meeting, but that's what they love because they dominate those spaces and the quieter voices fade away. So we need to provide for everything. So it's a difficult area to be working in. Just on that submission from the Terra CLC, there was really one interesting point right at the very end, talked about the re-establishment of catchment calls. And I tried to probe Hugh on what that meant in a governance way. He didn't really elaborate on that, but maybe we could use that as a springboard question into our discussion around the CLCs and what their future would be. Governance options around that sort of stuff, maybe. So there is an opening that that the committee did provide to us, I think.
Robert.
Through you, Mr. Chair.
You want to respond?
Yes, I think with the town hall meetings, it really depends on what's under discussion and how much public appetite there is for. Yeah, if people largely agree with what's been proposed, then they're less likely to turn up to a meeting. So, we can't assume that.
Robert.
Or if you're proposing to demolish the town hall, you'll probably get a good meeting.
Correct.
I'm just interested in, you talked about the community notice boards and you sounded quite hopeful, and I thought it's interesting. The comment you made was that we don't manage them, presumably they do. Can you tell us just a little bit more about the potential of those? They sound to me a bit conceptually a bit like catchment groups and things that they offer in a way. The community notice board presumably would be something that urban people might be more, or township people might be more engaged with
I
than
think
before.
through you, Mr. Chair, I think it's possibly urban and rural. I think there's quite some really good rural community boards, community notice boards. I guess the one thing you need to be aware is that they're run by individuals. They don't necessarily, you don't have any control over the moderation of those. So
It's the moderation you're talking about.
Yeah, essentially it's good to get eyeballs on ads, and we're happy to be, it's really good to be involved in those, but we don't run them. We run our own channels, obviously, Facebook.
You can't have someone assigned to any particular area where there's something controversial to keep an eye out and then take part in the.
I'll certainly keep an eye on them at all times, and so from that point of view, we would be responding where it's appropriate. Yeah.
Interesting. Thank you.
Paul.
Thank you, Chair, through you. With regards to the concerns, there was concerns raised with quite a few submitters around transparency, and I couldn't understand whether it was the same meaning that they were looking for or not. I'm not sure, but we're looking at consent fees and rivers and river works and stakeholders, and we're looking at representation, which was previously mentioned by Morris. We've got catchment liaison committees that are there to represent our ratepayers. But they're not a stakeholder in any consent process. So they're not asked for their thoughts on any application of consents. So is there a disconnect? Is that what they were meaning by transparency? Is that what some of them are meaning? Do they want more inclusion? Or because we seem to be discussing stuff about individual CLCs. But it'll be good to get some clarity on that, because they're not included as a stakeholder during a consent application process, even though they are there representing ratepayers on catchments that works are going to be completed on.
I think it's a good ongoing conversation around the way that we communicate with them and engage with them.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think that's just something, a point, another way of thinking about it.
Right, I've got Morris, Jeremy, Lyndall, and Phil. Morris.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Well, just looking at the recommendation, the staff commentary rather, I think that's very good. I think it's very fair, given the submission, which was very personal and very aggressive. I thought that was totally unnecessary on their behalf. It's clear that the council does its best to communicate with the catchment chairs, and then it's up to them to communicate with their group. So I support this recommendation. There's one tiny point though, and that is the word resent. So it's supposed to be resent, but it's also resent, which is perhaps a little bit unfortunate. I think the word should have a hyphen in it so that it's clear that it's resent, not resent.
Very good. Good point. Okay, I've got Jeremy, Lyndall, then Phil.
I mean, at the end of the day, they agree to option one. That's the main context of their discussion. There's obviously, when we delve into it, there's a lot of talk about transparency, understanding where the money's going, spent, keeping it. There's a very localism, which is what we're looking at, sorry. Sort of localised, having sort of control of the money from some of these groups. But I think we've sort of agreed that reserves, they're talking about the reserves being kept in. I think that's been agreed. There's obviously a lot of transparency issues around the work done. There's a feeling that obviously that some of the work's not getting done. It's getting more tied up into paperwork and the actual physical stuff not being done. I know we have a change of process, slow the flow, reimagining Mataura and things like that. But ultimately, we still have to do things, I think. And there's probably a bit of frustration in these areas for that. But they still obviously agree, coming back to the option one from the capital value, 100%. So I think there's a lot of stuff we need to carry on doing, working with these groups in the future to sort of just keep the transparency is the big thing, where they just want to see very clear where the money's going. So, and then hopefully in time that'll build up some trust in what we're doing. I fingers crossed to say Morris, but it is it's a change, but they do support capital value 100%.
Lyndall.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, just similar to Councillor Rodway, appreciated the staff commentary in response to some aggressively posed questions, I would have to say. Particularly with the modelling questions, and I'm aware that Mr. Halliwell's online, so without wanting to extend the conversation too much further, whether anybody felt that Stephen needed to contribute as an explanation, but that's a genuine question, because actually I think the staff response is sufficient. If anybody doesn't understand, Mr. Halliwell's there.
Through you, Chair, so the points being responded to are why was option 2 considered as an option, and that mix of 100%, mix of 80 70 and 30% rather, why was that selected? And then secondly, with option 3, why was that included? And those are matters that the project team have discussed and with Stephen as our independent advisor. Stephen, is there anything you'd like to comment on in relation to those 2 points?
No, nothing to add at this stage.
Okay, we'll move to Phil, then myself.
Just in respect to that point that you raised about why did we include status quo as option 3? You've indicated in the response that it was considered best standard practice in consultations, but I actually thought on the day the explanation was a little bit more strong than that. We actually didn't have an option where we had to include it. I thought there was some legislative or regulatory thing that if you're consulting, you've got to include the status quo. So I just wonder if we wanted to just adjust that wording to make it a little bit more obvious that it wasn't actually optional for us, whether we included or otherwise. It was, we were compelled to include it. But I stand to be corrected if that was not right.
And I'm pretty sure that was Stephen's advice that we needed to actually include the status quo for fairness, so that's why it was there.
So in my mind, it's more than just best standard practice; it's required practice.
Stephen, is there anything you'd like to say on that one? Have you got the wording in front of you? Or?
No, I haven't got the wording in front of me, but the statement that it's required because it's reasonably practical remains the same. That's correct. So it's just a case of slightly different wording, and I'd go with the recommendation from the councillor.
And just briefly, I think the questions about transparency, ring-fencing funding have been pretty well covered. One of the other complaints was that often that staff don't let them know something's happening, and I think that's as simple as a telephone call to chairs saying, look, we're starting on this, but next week this is what's happening, and I think that'll help build trust. But overall, Hugo Dine has for years asked for a change to the rating system. So whether it's reluctantly or not, he has been one for at least 10 or 15 years has said that we need to have a more equitable system, and reluctantly they're supporting it. So I think that's all good.
Through you, Chair, I don't know if the other general managers would like to comment at all on this particular submission point, because they have helped the project team with the response here to this particular submission. Lucy or Amy, was there anything you wanted to say in relation to this?
Peter.
Yeah, I just want to comment on the way Hugh comes in, and this happens on quite a bit, and behaviours seem to deteriorate with this aggressive way of interacting with us, and I've seen that deteriorate. It's just we're in a closed room here, and
No, we're on the extreme.
no, okay.
So you can't just
Talk about
It's already happened a few times this morning, so.
Okay.
So I'm for what I'm hearing, there's no actual additions to the staff recommendation, am I?
So we will tweak that wording about the status quo option to just strengthen that slightly.
Right. Excellent. Okay, we'll move to number 4, which is the RETI Catchment Committee.
This is on page 34 of the agenda. So the RETI committee is raising concerns about transparency and accountability and guarantees in relation to their role going forward. So I won't read all the points, but just noting there are some parallels obviously with the Mataura submission. So in a similar vein, it's recommended council thanks the submitter for their submission and notes those comments and the commentary in relation to the Mataura Catchment Liaison Committee is also relevant to the submission. So we'll use that response if council is satisfied with that to the RETI committee as well.
Oh, yeah, so that brings back to my question around transparency, where some CLCs, they all mention the word, but there is a difference, I believe. And getting back to that main point noted, the request for more transparency for large projects. you know, the CLC want to be included. They want to be involved and want to know what's happening. And a lot of large projects involve a lot of ratepayers' money. And unfortunately, we see ourselves when we have central government give us funding for large projects, and we have to come up with 40%, that the figure's already out there before tenders are asked for. So it's very hard to get the best price, but including CLCs may be an opportunity where we get true and valid pricing.
Lucy, is there anything you'd like to respond to in terms of that point?
It's just a
Yeah, we're
transparency.
just talking, Lucy, about the transparency for large projects such as the Winton to Benmore banking upgrade and how the catchment liaison committee can be more involved.
Yes, through you, Chair. Thanks for the question. So the projects like the OET project that is underway, the business case and the delivery of that is being drafted at the moment for presentation to council. The CLC is being briefed on the way through, but it is still, it was the money that we got in September that was unexpected money. And so they've been being briefed as the same as you. So our intention would be for them to be involved considerably moving forwards with any future monies, but at this point we're dealing with the money that we were gifted back in September. Does that answer your question, Councillor?
To a certain extent, it's just me noting that the meaning of transparency by different groups means different things, but it was quite clear with the Areti committee what they believe transparency should lead to them being involved in more large projects or having knowledge of more large projects.
So one of the things, Chair, that we've also been working on over the last few months is sharing more deliberately with them the papers that you receive. So a lot of the papers that go to the Regional Services Committee have got quite a lot of detail in them around the work programs that have been undertaken catchment by catchment. But the Catchment Liaison Committee chairs expressed to us over the last few months they weren't all looking for them or seeing them, and so very deliberately now sharing those reports with them in advance. Maybe you will get them tomorrow for regional services, so they'll get that quarterly report back, so they'll be able to see what's been underway. We're also intending obviously to involve them in future-looking conversations as well, given the feedback we've been getting about how we spend the money that's set aside in each of the catchments.
No, thanks for that, Lucy, and I think that transparency is going to help quite a bit. There was an assumption that we'd already made it, that we'd seen the business case for that already stuff, which we haven't yet. So we can't share it until we've actually got it. I've got Lyndall, Jeremy, then Peter.
Thank you, Chairman. Just in relation to the staff commentary, I would have to disagree that a lot of the commentary can just be replicated from the Matilda committee, because Mr. Rose and Mr. Marshall actually asked some very specific questions which are listed in the submissions heard column. So I'm a little bit reluctant just to lump them in with the response from a similar response to the Matilda one. I think we could answer those very specific main points that have been noted clearly. Not promising things we can't deliver, of course, but answering their requests, because they're quite specific and quite different to some of the issues raised by Mr. Gardine. So I would prefer that we were a bit more precise in our response to Mr. Rose. He likes precision, and it won't hurt us to respond to him in a precise way, I don't think. But that might be just me.
Through you, Chair, we can certainly do that. There are some things like the reserves policy, which the response is exactly the same, but
yeah,
note your point that we need to be quite specific.
There's some very specific things there, like whether we can or cannot provide confirmation that catchment budgets will be prepared as before for the 8 liaison committees, for example, to be clear about what we're doing about that.
Jeremy, Peter, Morris, Phil, then Paul. Jeremy.
Yeah, we've got one word that's been used a lot in transparency, and assurance is one of their main concerns. And that, again, it'll come down to proof of this in the pudding when you put this in play, that we do as we say and show that we do it. And this is probably a common thing when something changes, that they just, they can see that we're actually doing what we're saying in regards to funds, reserves. And they do have specific questions about certain projects and things that we obviously have answered, and we will give them heads up on those cost structures and bits and pieces of infrastructure. So, yeah, but I agree there are differences, so we clarify that a bit.
Peter.
Yeah, just on that word transparency too, sometimes with councils, people can think a lack of transparency or communication, suspicion can grow. But maybe we need to think about just being really clear and say we're just not at that stage yet, or that where it's not in front of us yet. When it will be, we'll let you know. Because avoid of information, suspicion can grow.
Morris.
Yes, yes, I certainly support what Councillor Ludlow has mentioned, but what I wanted to say is that in terms of transparency, I mean, and in some, I think that the submitters, both in the, especially the Ariti one, wanting to have much more, it's my impression anyway, wanting to have much more involvement in the planning of the works, which I don't think is appropriate. I'm not sure whether that's where the fine line is. Obviously, you have a meeting and you talk about what's going to happen and all that sort of thing, and I guess there's opportunity there for input into things, and some of the practical things that they suggest at the meeting sometimes can be really good, but you know, you do have to have a hard line between the council making the decisions as what to do and the public having input into into those activities. So that needs to be made clear, I think, so that they don't get their hopes up. They don't actually talk about catchment boards before, be actually part of the planning process. So that's really important to emphasise that if we can. But also going back to representation and who should be told about these works. There's multiple ways that we can let people know that we're going to be starting on the victim blood bank next week, sort of thing. Multiple ways of telling people about that, but let's not just tell the catchment liaison chairs. Let's tell everybody in the community that the submissions from people like John Whitehead and Emma Moran were that the urban people are now having to pay more than they were in the past for all of these works, so they deserve to know what's going on just as much as the people in the catchment liaison committee. So I think that's something that obviously we'll talk about that in the future, but that's something that we need to perhaps reflect on these submissions and these answers back to the submitters.
Phil.
Yeah, one of my points is answered, so be short, but just to observe that we've had these calls for things such as representation and transparency. They relate primarily to how we expend the funds on river management. And really what this consultation is about is how we collect the funds. So I just want to flag that the consultation is really asking how we go about collecting it, not how we spend it, and how we manage and engage with the community on spending it. I just want to, because I sense that we're getting dragged into this discussion around how we're going to manage the process going forward for expending and engaging and prioritising with our communities on how to expend that, whereas actually the consultation that we've engaged with here is not attending to that, it's attending to how do we collect the funding. Just want to remind that.
Paul.
Thank you. With regards to the concerns that the Ariti catchment chairs had was around a lot of the, which has been raised the last couple of years about money going into one big bucket. And in the staff commentary, there's no reply regarding that. And if it was to be based on what the Mataura one was, it says that some elements of our flood management work has to ensure that all costs for the whole region are paid for the whole region. So we need to make sure we're telling them the true, is the money going into one bucket? Because I've been reassured for the last few years that it wasn't. And with regards to what Phil said regarding how we're spending the money, just if we're going to ask for money, we need to prove that we can spend it efficiently and effectively and properly. Just the same as if we want to make changes, we have to rely on the science. If we're going to be asking our ratepayers for money, we can't just ask for it willy-nilly without taking into the fact that we have to prove that we are capable of spending it correctly. So that's a big thing. We can't have one without the other. So that commentary, I believe, for the Arete should go back to reassuring regarding the budgets, funds, and if it's not what they want to hear, we need to be truthful with them and tell them what the process will be. Thank you.
And I think just picking up one or two comments. The liaison committees have the ability to have oversight. It's the whole difference between management and governance. But also, we're making it quite clear they will still have a catchment budget each year. So that, and that we're ring-fencing the revenue. It's not disappearing. So that, I think that transparency, as Lucy said, they'll get an invitation or get the papers showing exactly where money is being spent. One of the reasons actually we did move to the regional type thing with management was the ability to actually move people around a bit more flexibly, and say they would go where the jobs were needed at the time. But I think we've had a few comments we've picked up as the odd change put to that submission. Yeah, everybody's reasonably happy with
just on what you said, Nicola. Thank you. I know you're being clear, and I tried to make it clear as well. But in the staff commentary response for the Mataura, is one of the primary reasons for last year's change to generate to some elements of our flood management work was to ensure that all costs that benefit the whole region are paid for by the whole region, which sounds like one bucket. So we need to make sure that we are telling the correct response to the correct people, because you don't want to come back in a year's time and have them saying, hang on, this is what we didn't want to happen, and it is. So we need to, which one is it? Is it that one, or is it we're ring-fencing the funding? So we need to make sure that we've got it right. So Rachel, to my point, we need to make sure that whatever we're responding back to them is correct and true, even if it's not what they want to hear. Because we don't want to be a year down the track and say, someone say, look, we've been told this and we've been told that by the chairman, by the regional services committee, and it's not that.
So I'm hearing that, we need to clarify those elements, and there is a difference obviously between the catchment planning activity, which is now 100% regional funded and associated budget, versus how this will be the management activity going forward.
So with the word catchment help in that funding, like basically we are still collecting over the whole thing, so and it will be, well, the whale chain is different, but really that's basically what we're saying. We're not actually saying it's all one bucket, because the budgets are there and the funding from that thing are staying within the catchment. So that word catchment might be a help. Just for everybody happy with that? Okay, having noted those changes, we can move to 206, Robina and Ellen Johnson.
So again, attendance at the hearing, overall support for option 1, and recommending council thanks the submitter for their submission and notes the comments. And we'll obviously make a decision shortly around which option you'd like to proceed with.
Everyone happy with the staff response for that one? Mm-hmm.
Then we had Louise O'Callaghan, who also spoke at the hearing in opposition to options 1 and 2, and requesting or noting that while a regional river funding rate is meritorious, it should only be implemented once the amalgamation proposal is withdrawn. So the staff response, suggested response, is thanking the submitter for their submission and noting their comments, noting that the withdrawal of Southland District Council's unitary authority proposal is outside of the control of Environment Southland.
Phil?
Yeah, just on that presentation, was not this the lady who kind of adjusted her position at the time, saying that what was in my written submission, actually, having heard the previous presentations, I do actually think that maybe option one is a viable option. And it stood out for me on that occasion because of her willingness to hear the views of others and change her stance or change her orientation. And so on that basis, I'm just not quite sure if that summary of what she submitted, that might summarise what her written submission said, but actually I think if you were to review the recording on the day, it might reflect a slightly different outcome in terms of what she actually spoke to.
So certainly, through to that, at the hearing point could be expanded to bring through that.
Yeah,
comments.
and so I think the safest thing might be to review the recording if we didn't capture it quite effectively, just to understand what she did speak to on the day, because so my notes reflect that she was advocating or conceded that option one is probably the best option.
Yeah, cool.
Robert, then Eric.
Thank you. Yeah, one of the points that she made, Louise made while she was here, or one of the questions was around the 13th councillor and how that process, she was deeply unhappy about that. Is that something we can respond to? And with regard to that, could you remind me how that decision was made? Was that a decision we made and voted on? Yes. Yes.
It was made by the local government commission.
Yeah.
Final decision.
They made
Final decision based on our.
I'm sorry.
But it's outside scope probably of what we're talking about.
Can I respond to that question, Chairman, or do you want me to do it offline?
I think we can respond.
I very clearly remember the vote around the council table because I was the only one that voted for the 13 councillors. And then the
Are you sure?
yes.
I wonder if we could we get a record?
Oh, did you? Oh, I know. I
That would be
did.
good. I'm not
But
challenging you. I'd like to.
yeah,
see-
but the
Wow.
commission made the final decision. But we did discuss it at length.
So
Anyway,
other questions that a submitter might pose during a submission, are they not to be responded to, or are we not to consider? Is this what we're saying here?
Through you, Chair, we actually had a conversation, Stephen Halliwell, and I, on this. Traditional practice here at Environment Southland has been to respond to questions and comments that might be outside the realm of the submission of the matter being consulted on, and try to provide as much information back to a submitter as possible. I would note here that the matters raised at the hearing, we do need to capture a bit more in that question around the representation review. We certainly could put some commentary around that, but Stephen has advised that across the country, that's not actually standard practice, that most councils, just because of the logistics and time involved, would limit themselves to only talking about the matters that were part of the consultation process.
Thank you.
Okay, we've got Eric.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I don't really, this isn't a biggie, but under Louise staff commentary, the withdrawal of South District Council's dual unitary authority proposal is outside of the control. But it is a process we're engaged in, and I'm just wondering if we just accurately reflecting. It is outside our control, but we are engaged, and if we make some comment further down the line that this might bite us in some way by participating in while we don't have control, I'm just not sure we've summed that up as fulsomely as we should.
Probably a good point that we could mention that all the other councils have been asked now to comment.
Yeah. Just some we comment in there just so that we.
Linda, have you got something else Peter?
Yeah, I just want to make a comment on quite a lot of the submitters. A written submission must come in quite a bit earlier. The verbal submission, that takes quite a bit of lining up the two to see common points. There's a lot of things outside of the written submission that submitters talk to in their 5 minutes. I find it hard to make some sense of the two, to weave them both together. So we're looking for things that are consistent, aren't we? So maybe, I don't know, do we communicate that to, in future processes about answering those clear questions that we're putting out? It's important to do that, not just assuming that those questions will be answered.
I think when there's clear questions, we do endeavour to try and answer them, especially if they're within the scope of the submissions. So, yeah. Any further comments or additions to Louisa Callaghan's submission? If not, we move to close.
So this submission starts on page 35 and there's 3 key points. Essentially support for the concept of rating equity, then support for catchment liaison committees, and just noting the concern about a more centralised funding model and how that might impact the role of the catchment liaison committees, seeking clarity around their role going forward. And then lastly, expressions of concerns about the robustness of the consultation and engagement process. So the response has got some parallels with earlier responses and does refer to the Mataura Catchment Liaison Committee response, but we can draw through the specific points and make sure that we are directly responding to the Federated Farmers submission if you would like us to.
Paul?
Thank you, Rachel, through you, Chair. I know you're saying that, you've added on staff commentary on the Mataura Catchment Liaison, but I think it's more aligned with what the Ariti are asking. So in 2 different submitters there, we've had that seem to be copied and pasted, and I personally don't like that. But with regards to the funding model, it is based around the one bucket thing again. So I think by having that commentary around similar to what we respond to the Mataura is not our best way forward. We need to treat every submission as a valid and true submission by each individual party. So, but I think it's more in line with the Ariti than anything. So, it's just that's been copied and pasted a bit.
Just on that point, do all submitters see everything, or are they just seeing their individual thing? They're saying, see the commentary on the Mataura. So if haven't got it in front of them, it doesn't actually answer the.
It's not what we see.
Okay, Peter, then Jeremy.
Yeah, no, the submission, as I remember, the verbal submission and the written one was quite heavy on the loss of representation by the catchment liaison committees and the wish to retain that. And I think one of the questions was around that. The reality is that where the rating burden goes, so will the representation. And this council probably needs to be clear around that too for the future. There's always a deep-seated concern around that. There has been for a while around the catchment liaison committees losing some of their influence. Maybe this council needs to just acknowledge that that may be the case as we broaden that rate burden out across the region. That will be the case. I don't think there's any escaping that. They know that. I think we know that, and we should address that.
I've got Jeremy, then Phil.
I think the main thing, the key points, again, just keeping it simple, is they do agree to the capital value of the option 1. And in principle, I was just reading the key points in principle, the council's priority of maintaining a social economic resilient region, recover quickly from impacts of flooding is feared. They support the concept of rating equity, specifically the region benefits as a whole, and the cost should be fairly distributed. They obviously have concerns around, again, transparency, accountability, but they support the catchment committee. So as far as I'm concerned, they do agree with the option 1. Probably when they talk about rating equity and things like that. I think probably good point, because I have heard submissions in the past from feds indicating the rural pay more rates than the urban, and that's incorrect. The urban sector actually have a lower rate take than the rural area. So just want to make that point clear too sometimes. So it's come in the past and I haven't made that point, but they agree to what generally what we're wanting to do with option one.
Thanks, Jeremy. Phil?
Yeah, just responding to Peter's suggestion, I just think that might be a risk involved in if we did try to speak to that within our response to them, because we'd be kind of speculating as to when that might occur and what it is we might be considering for the future. So I would kind of be tempted to leave that aside at this point and just stay focused on what was the key focus of the consultation.
Lyndall?
Thanks, Chairman. I just, on page 14/19, there was a question about examples of other flood management, other models of flood management systems. Kind of chucked back at us because I think Councillor Rodway asked something about that. Are we able to respond that we are investigating that, or is it best left for later? Do you think? Okay.
So we'll come back to it through the gravel discussion.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Okay.
So again, a few amendments to make to that submission. The next set are submitters that were not heard at the hearing. So to take you through those. The first one is a name called EP. We do have more personal details in the actual submission, but they haven't put their full details in the name, but they're supporting option 2. And there's a draft response to their submission, which will obviously need to be updated when you make a decision on which option that you would like to proceed with. Are there any comments on that one, or move to the next one?
Eric?
Just a point of clarification, is this an anonymous submission? And if it is, how do we actually handle that? One would assume that there needs to be some identity.
There are
Okay.
details provided, they just
Oh,
haven't
okay.
put full details in their submitted name. We do have address and email and phone number.
Okay.
Yeah.
It does seem to me to be something of an aberration to the process of making a public submission.
Nicole, could I speak to this?
Okay, Robert.
I was wondering about that anonymity that affects, well, surely would affect the presentation with regard of our knowledge of any background that there might be. What is the actual position on this?
We can't respond to them unless we've got an address in there.
Yeah, so we do have personal details, but I can ask our legal advisor whether we should have got a full name in order to include the submission, but we do have other details for them.
I understand that, but nevertheless.
Okay, you happy with the staff response?
Just on, sorry, just on the anonymity of that. If Rachel, you've got the information with regards to who that person is, and that's fine. In my eyes, we need to focus on the submission, and sometimes it's assumed that council focus on the submitter personally, because a lot of times it's the same person. And in my mind, I think it would be best to focus on the submission. And if you've got the information to reply, i.e. an email address and address and the name, then thank you. See, with the reply.
But Robert, then Peter.
Thank you. Just on that point, is there any reason why councillors can't be furnished with that information that we do know?
Yeah, we can certainly provide that one to you. We haven't included address details in the packs that have gone out into the public domain, but there is no barrier to us giving you the full details.
Peter?
Just need to be really clear on this, of what information is enough to accept the submission, what isn't, basically, because we'll talk about, we should focus on the submission, not the submitter. But we could have a group that comes in under there and skews the process. So we just need to be really clear. I'm not really too sure if we are upfront, what is enough information to warrant an accepted submission.
I'm sure that Rachel can furnish
Yeah.
that name. I was more concerned if it was ET rather than EP, but that's me.
So the next submitter is Tim Winslade, who's expressed concern that this was an approach to raise dollars, not reduce flooding. There is a detailed response there, but I guess the short point is that obviously the rating review isn't raising additional revenue by itself, it's just how the funds are collected. If there's any comments on that one?
Are you happy with the staff response? Good, okay, we move to 4. Emma Moran.
So Emma Moran is supporting option 3, the current rate. There are a couple of submission points, so there's 4 itself and then 4A. With an additional comment that it's inequitable for urban ratepayers to be the cost of rural schemes, and just noting a similar in their view situation with pollution, so making the same correlation there. So the staff response thanks the submitter for their submission and notes their comments, and just has the commentary, I guess, the rationale for the regionalised approach that has been used previously.
With Morris, then Phil.
Just to let you know, Mr. Chairman, that Emma has emailed the Invercargill constituency members, and some of us have responded to her on this subject separately, but just letting you know that conversation had been going on.
Transparency. I've got Phil, then Lyndall.
Yeah, just there wasn't a lot of detail provided in Emma's submission, but she spoke to that idea of creating subsidies and incentivising poor decision making. And I know that our response speaks to the rationale being this is an approach whereby all people will benefit from it. I think the heart of Emma's concern was that what are the key drivers of an increased flood risk? And the sense that it is the draining of wetlands, it is the drainage of farmlands up in the catchments that is generating the increased flood risk. And the question then becomes, was it equitable for people who live in towns who have no influence over the activities that have increased the flood risk, and that this system may remove the incentives for people upstream to modify their behaviours in the future in and of itself, because actually they're now paying less relative to the urban and the commercial business, commercial ratepayers, who are going to be carrying more of the burden for this, and yet there could yet be behaviours that continue to exacerbate the flood risk upstream the catchments. And so I'm just not sure if that response around describing the rationale for the benefits attends to our concerns about what are the drivers of the increased flood risk. And I probably, even though there was very scant detail in the submission, it was those additional communications to the Invercargill ratepayers that probably highlight the essence of this. And I'm just adding a bit of flesh to a concern around that effect of creating subsidies and incentivising poor decision making and unintended consequences.
Just raise a point of order here. Are we not meant to be engaging with the submissions like we've been very told while we're doing deliberations? Was that very clear?
Yeah.
I'm just asking that question. I'm just putting it there. And I think it was a no, we're not meant to be engaging with people.
Because I need to make effort not to engage.
So I'm just saying the
I know, I'm not-
response, the
I'm
response
I
to
think
the
the-
stakeholder.
I think the point you're making is there could be a little bit added to that we're actually funding the creation of wetlands. It's a specific point, it's
Hang on,
outside
can I-
that.
To deal with my point of order, please. I'm just saying it's a yes, no. Are we, we're specifically told not to engage. I mean, Councillor Rodway has said we has been engaged. I don't know where we all stand, but we're told not to engage with people who submit while we're doing deliberations before deliberations. Is that correct?
I'm assuming councillors would not have been able to make many comments because they're still deliberating, but.
Sorry.
It's a yes, no, that's a.
No, you're not supposed to.
No.
You want to respond to that?
Well, yeah, no, the conversation, the email conversation occurred before us.
Yes,
Before submissions.
And so it was like any ratepayer trying to get.
Okay, well, that's clear, that, you hadn't told it, so that's clarified that. So this is engagement before the submission
Yeah,
process. Okay,
After.
not since since submission. Okay, no, I'm all good.
Chairman,
Just
if I may,
wasn't clarified.
Points that Phil make are very valid, and she probably didn't, I mean, the reading between the lines of her submission, and because she had expressed those views to us by email, then we are, that's why I said to it, we've had, but it's just like you talking to your ratepayers, they ring you up and say, what's going on, so it's no different to that, really.
But it relates to a submission.
No.
We're gonna have it loose here at the moment. Yeah.
Sorry.
Look, I think we've clarified that this has come up before.
It's normal. I'm happy with that.
Lyndall.
Yeah, my point was going to be about the engaging with submitters, and I'm just trying to find the date for Emma's original email, but it was a process issue that I was going to discuss, so I think we can leave it there.
Good, Eric, then Robert.
Well, I was just going to respond to the point that Phil made, and that is about the substance of the comment. While Emma's comments in effect have some validity, my view would be that draining wetlands is something that doesn't occur now, and there's been huge plantings of trees in the catchment area, which again is slowing down runoff. So I'm not sure that there is any increase currently in, certainly through the 80s and 90s under the LDEL, and at that time there was significant impact, but today I'm not sure there is.
So, Mr. Chair, just my concern was not justifying her concerns and the validity of it. I'm just saying that the response to her submission, I think, is off target. It's responding to a different aspect of the equity question, and I don't think that's what her submission.
Right.
I think she was talking to the equity of who generates the effects should pay more versus who benefits from the investment should contribute equitably. But I'm putting Rachel in a difficult situation because I'm not entirely sure what I would need some time to consider or contribute to what an appropriate response might be. But I think the current response might rankle and ignore rather than actually respond to the concern.
Well, if you're hearing on two sides of the table, is we could have some addition to that response. Robert.
It's just a point, but not a point of order. Could you, Mr. Chairman, clarify for us what a point of order is and when it's to be used? Because it's becoming more common, I noticed, just over the last while, and yet, to my mind, there are not points of order that are being made. I imagine a point of order is called when there is disorder, but there isn't a disorder.
No.
Not necessarily, Robert. I mean, you could have a point of order or a point of information, and we haven't used them as much in the past, but if you have a look at your standing orders, it's a legitimate
breach of process.
Yeah, so.
But was process being breached in those instances? That's what I'm saying.
Look, it probably turned out to a matter of clarification, which I think is a very important one to actually clarify.
Robert, I want to use it.
Thank you. Just in relation to this, sorry for what you said, it just seemed like you're expanding on what the actual submission was. The submission was given to us, all of us, to make comment on, and then to find out. Sure, it may have happened beforehand, but to what your comments are, Phil, I believe it was expanding on top of what her submission was written because of what you had heard from him. So it's just that it would be good if we all got that as a submission, not just the Invercargill.
Yes.
Thank you.
Lyndall, you
I was going to read the points of order section out of my standing orders, which are right in front of me, but I can do that at another time, Chairman, if you'd rather.
okay, Peter?
Yeah, it might just be for the future anyway, for future council to, when we go into these submission processes, have some clear line of sight of when communications cease. In defence of the city, councillors, no one can stop an email coming into your inbox. It's how you respond, or if you respond, or how you respond in a polite but careful way. So maybe some, when we go into this process, have a discussion with the council about the do's and don'ts around that, because it is a wee bit opaque when we go into one, when we can come out of what can be done, because I'm sure the city councillors won't be the only ones that have received emails, or people been talking to them too, so we're learning experience, you could say.
No, good point. And I think, a key tenet of natural justice is that everybody receives all the information, and it's just something we need to keep in mind. Okay,
Sorry, just to clarify, it was very clear, and I agreed, like Morris sorted it out very quickly. It's just we need to know the date and the engagement around the email. And on this, with the email now, I speak with Emma. So I would love to see the extra information or whatever. I certainly got a lot of time and respect on her ability around the economics and understanding of South. And so there's a lot more to this, but I can't take it into consideration because there's no other that other information I haven't received. But I mean, Phil's given us a pretty good in-depth analysis of it. But yeah, in the future, I'd love to see, or if there is stuff, to see a bit more of what she has indicated.
Mr. Chairman, if I may prolong this just briefly. Emma's written submission says it is completely inequitable for urban ratepayers to bear the costs on rural schemes. We put up with pollution from intensive agriculture, and now we have to subsidise their infrastructure. 3 question marks. This is not economic efficiency. And that's exactly what Phil was trying to explain before. So, you know, I think it deserves a slightly enlarged response.
we all agreed to, you're noting that. Yeah. Okay, we'll move to 5, Vaughan Hawkins.
Supporting option 1. Then Alistair Culbert supporting option 3, and I guess giving the rationale that it's shifting the cost, moving to a full CV rating system shifts the cost to residential ratepayers, and there is a response to the submitter in line with the rationale for a regional approach.
Paul.
It was a very good question regarding the residential ratepayers unable to put the cost of rates or the GST component against taxable income as businesses and commercial as can. So, you know, that was a very good logical submission. And I don't think it's answered in the answer. Because effectively we'd like to have some of that GST for ourselves at the end of it.
And so when we,
sorry,
even industry can only claim their dwelling part. I think the rest of it is still, or no, the dwelling part isn't deductible, is it? From memory, the business might be. Any everybody happy with the response to that submission?
Have a cup of coffee.
So maybe could we get through to the end of the rating review submissions, which
getting there, then what?
Yeah.
Capping. Okay, so we move to Alan Beard,
who is supporting option 1, the regional rate, and just noting the importance of the liaison committees as well. Then we have Debbie Sinclair supporting option 1. Redpath Limited with Tony Saunders as director supporting option 3 and suggesting not to change things for the sake of it. And responses, again, the rationale for a regional approach. Then we have submitted number 10, Arawata Assets Limited, who is supporting option 1. Andrew Hunt supporting option 1 with a bit of rationale for that. And John Whitehead supporting option 2, which is the mix of regional and local rate, and stating that residents who live in a floodplain should have to make a conscious decision to reside, or have made a conscious decision to reside there and therefore should pay. So the rationale is the same as some of the others in terms of explaining the regional benefit.
John?
Yeah, possibly a comment is maybe a reflection on where the burden sat for the last however many years with the rate structure. So maybe those in the flood zone haven't truly played their contribution. So that hasn't really been discussed over the years. The cumulative income from those in the floodplains that aren't necessarily protected.
And certainly one of the comments that appeared to be that if you live in a floodplain in the city, tough luck. But,
yeah, that's not what we're saying. Yeah.
We've had people coming in for years and saying we've well and truly paid for the infrastructure over the years, and it's time to try and look at the broader view, which is actually option 1. So
We can add in some additional.
Okay.
Thank you. So turning to page 12, we've got Wayne Stokierski, who is supporting option 1. And then actually the following submitters are all supporting option 1 as well, down to number 200, Dean Stockdale, who's supporting the current rate, but not necessarily giving us a rationale for that. Submitter 202 is Ian Smith, who is supporting the current rate and pointing back to his submission on the long-term plan, and in fact his opinion has not changed. So the explanation there talks on it actually needs an amendment. I've just realised it's talking about a rate increase, but we need to be very clear that the this consultation isn't about the rate increase, it's just about the rating mechanism, so we'll make a tweak there. And then the final submission, unless councillors have got any other suggested changes to the Ian Smith response, is Wilkins Farming, who are supporting option 1, the regional rate, and they have asked to see further prioritisation in addressing bankside erosion and gravel aggradation in areas of riverbeds and banks, and also rate the catchment liaison committee role as well.
Sorry. Well, going back to Ian Smith, you said you want to make it clear to them that the submission was only around the calculation and not the rates increase. But would you include in that giving them an option to submit when that comes around as well? Because we just need to make sure that you are going to change that and make it clear to us.
It's a little bit confusing in that they've reiterated their points from the long-term plan, which were about the rates increase, but the current consultation, this formal consultation, is about the rating mechanism. So just you're trying to make it a bit clearer.
But if we direct them towards the other,
So what Rachel was saying is we'll make it clear that we're not actually getting any more money. It's just how it's allocated. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything further on Wilkins?
I was just going to add, like obviously a fair bit of support for option 1, and there's obviously a few people who are just saying, yeah, they're happy with option 1, but as they're looking, how do we see the proof in the pudding of implementing that and around transparency and things like that. So it's all pretty good.
Well, I think that might be probably break for a coffee break, then we'll come back and do the feeding charges.
Do we need to just leave ourselves in Part of the conversation today is whether we get one. Oh, so the windy thing on the right is for the tilted ones. And the tip forward, I roll it forward.
Going back onto live streaming.
This pedal was for the back.
Okay, welcome back to the submission process. Next up is changes to the fees and charges schedule. Okay, back there now. First up is Lloyd McKellen.
Through you, Chair, just before we go into the fees and charges scheduled submissions, I'm aware that at the last meeting, there were a couple of declarations of conflicts of interest, so just wanting to check.
Yeah, for our dairy consent and also restriction on our property.
And obviously a dairy consent order discharge and order taken a discharge consent, so what dairy.
Thank you for that clarification. Right. We're going to ask staff at the stage to speak about cost recovery matters that were brought up during that submission.
That's right, so we've got Hayley Fitchett and Jen.
Kia ora koutou. With a number of submitters asked about whether we were proposing the gravel monitoring fee on a cost basis or what the customer can bear, I can confirm it's on a cost basis. We've done a detailed analysis and breakdown over the last 2 years of what our gravel monitoring activities have cost us, and that's not just looking at staff time, it's looking at other costs as well as staff time, including cost of travelling to the site to undertake monitoring activity. And in recognition of, so there's a breakdown looking at the number of consents, number of hours per each consent that we spend. We looked at our travel costs in terms of per kilometre costs. We looked at the number of, on an assumption of 2 inspections per consent as well. So of course, in our proposals, we are moving towards a risk-based approach to the number of monitoring visits that we undertake for gravel extraction consents. And then we looked at 2 scenarios where we use a senior resource management officer and we use a more junior resource management officer as well. So there's some backcasting on historic data, so exactly what has it cost us to undertake each gravel monitoring visit, inspection, the associated work around it, and then also looking forward towards a change in approach in order to drive through efficiencies and support the cost-effective outcomes for our customers in the gravel monitoring space. So, and I'm happy to I'm happy to circulate this analysis in a summary form after this as well. I've only got the raw data on the spreadsheet itself. So in terms of...
Somebody's not muted.
Oh, sorry, it was me when I came back online. Apologies. Sorted now.
Carry on, Hattie.
So at the moment, on average, the cost for an inspection is $809. So you'll note that's quite different to what we're proposing in the new gravel monitoring charge. That's out of recognition that this is a new proposed charge for our customers and consent holders, and something that they will need to factor into their business arrangements should it successfully go through if you decide to implement this charge. That is when a senior resource management officer undertakes the work. If we were to use a more junior resource management officer, the cost is around just over $680. So we're proposing a $500 this year, the increase in the next. We've also, of course, alongside it, implementing this risk-based approach as well, which we'll see. looking at consented extraction volumes. We will review that after year one, like we do with all types of risk-based monitoring, for example. And then when we have determined if they're low risk, then they may only need one consent, or low volume and low risk, they may only need one inspection. Others may continue to need two.
Right, I've got Peter, Paul, not Mary, and Neville.
Mr. Chairman, just regards to the submissions, can we talk about that too, and what Hayley's just talked about, all in one?
So again, you want to talk about the several?
Well, it just lines up with the a couple of submitters. I just made some notes here. And McGregor's and Royal Bush submission both argued around their general community good in terms of flood mitigation, and I don't feel that is recognised. So that was pretty clear in both those submissions. Is there a way of doing that? There's all sorts of levels to do that, isn't there? But is that something we should consider if they are providing through their commercial activities community benefit? We could at least acknowledge that at the lower end and maybe incentivise that too through their works. So yeah, that was just something that found those two submissions together. Was that?
I see we're talking about the staff looking at a potential waiver. Is that is probably what?
No, I'm just highlighting the commonality between the two. It was quite strong when they both came out like that.
Would you like to comment on that, Harvey?
Yes. So we saw that as attached to the gravel royalty aspect rather than the monitoring of those consents. And certainly, this is where I would with my colleague, Lucy, up to the table. We do appreciate that there is, there is public benefit in the activities that they undertake. And certainly we're willing to explore an exemption regime. That does, of course, have flow-on effects in terms of the amount of money that's collected and how that royalty is spent, and therefore, how far we can spread those activities. And that would require some additional work by my colleague to understand the implications for that.
Through you, Chair, Hayley's artfully answered the question in terms of, I think we need to do a bit more work to figure out what the implications are for the possible waiver that was discussed as part of the submissions. We haven't done that in the last week, but we'll definitely take the action from today's deliberations to do that piece and come back to you prior to making decisions on the particular part.
Through you, Chair, sorry, I just should also say we do note that other jurisdictions do have an exemption for this public benefit work, notably Environment Canterbury. As well as understanding the impact of an exemption regime, we would also need to develop a set of criteria as to how to apply it, recognising that, of course, that there is private benefit alongside public benefit with these types of activities as well. So we want to understand, how would this work so that it is appropriately applied.
Thanks for that. I've got Paul, Neville, Robert, and then Morris.
Well, thank you, through you, Chair. It looks like it's going to be a bit of a discussion point, Hayley, and you won't get away for a wee while yet.
Thank you.
With regards to the gravel consent information you give them, that's fine, but I think Lloyd McCallum, the submitter, asked regarding the area inspections as an example, and he also suggested councillors ask for a full breakdown. So you said you were going to give us a summary. It'd be good to have the raw data. But I've also been asked this question over my term by a couple of other ratepayers, one in particular who has done this previously in his previous role in a council, where he's asked for, you start at zero and you put what it costs you on. I think that was very similar to what Mr. McCallum was asking at the time, because he was saying, is it solely a cost recovery through fees and charges, or generating additional income? And I'm sure if it is generating a little bit of extra income, then that's fine. But what's, one of the questions would be, can we generate a lot of income? But also, then we move to, like Peter was moving on both those submitters. McGregor's made the comment, a fee on a fee. And the concerns were around the environmental monitoring fee, which they give information to council. And then when applying for consent, have to ask for the information back, even though we've already given the information. So they were very concerned that it was a double up. And I'm sure that's what they were saying. So it concerns me that they're getting a fee on a fee. So we need to determine, in the response back from staff, whether that is the case. And if they are supplying environmental monitoring information as part of their consent, that's a requirement for a consent renewal, then council should already have that information and not be asking for it here. Because I note that changes to the Local Government Act are coming up in December, and there's going to be more, part of that is improved council performance measurement and reporting standards so that ratepayers can more easily access consistent comparable data. So this is leading on to this. We need to be very transparent. But my question is the validity of a fee on a fee, the validity on a environmental monitoring information during consent, and then having to supply that all again during consent application again, and also a cost breakdown on, as an example, aerial inspections, not just gravel extraction.
So no, it's not a fee on a fee. And part of this proposal, the rationale was to improve transparency. What fee pays for what activities? So separating out the, as they call it, royalty from the compliance monitoring activity. So provide that clear separation, a clear transparency around what they're paying for and what they're getting. Speak. Yes, please do.
Yes, briefly. So, through your chair, just on the second question in regards to the doubling of information being supplied in different places. So I think one of the other rationales that underlines the proposal as it currently stands was to ensure that the information is being submitted once to the place that's going to use it for a myriad of different things, as opposed to it coming into one part of the division for one purpose or one part of the council for one purpose and then having to be resubmitted for a different purpose. So it is intended that that should be a co-benefit of what is being proposed, is that that would be in the place that it's needed to be for both of those purposes.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. And moving on to the rest.
Yes. So through you, Chair, in terms of the breakdown around, I do have the full cost data breakdown on some 27 fees and charges that sit within my area, and I'm happy to provide those on there. So there's quite a lot in that raw data. I'll have a look and see if there, because it's a 37-page spreadsheet that goes through multiple years of records in terms of actuals. So I'll see if there's a way that I can summarise it that's useful for councillors without losing the transparency of that information. So I'm really happy to do that. I know Jeremy has asked me this question before. Happy to provide the raw data as well.
Chairman, on the aerial inspection costs, one of the things that we have been doing, both Hayley and I across our divisions, is making sure that where we're going up in helicopters or planes for any particular reason, that we're doing it with more team members than we would have otherwise. So my biosecurity team, for instance, are teaming up with the catchment operations team. We're always getting compliance in on those flights so that where we are using aerial inspections for any of our monitoring or management, that we're doing it in a joined up way so that we're not kind of just one helo for one team and then another helo for another team. It's actually kind of trying to integrate that approach to make sure it's as efficient as it can be.
And through you, Chair, indeed, even within the resource management team, the officers that are there with multiple purposes. They're not just undertaking a singular monitoring activity, although somehow I always end up paying for the cost of the plane.
On charge.
Neville.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. It's pretty much answered what I was going to ask. the impression I got from McGregor Concrete and Royal Bush Transport that they were trying to understand why they could understand the royalty fees perhaps being increased, but the $500 fee escapes them, and you've had to explain it to us again, probably for the third time. So we're not getting through to them, giving them an understanding of why these fees that we intend to apply are done in that way. And if, interesting, 500 is a nice round number. How does it? Your question is, how does that make up? Wasn't it 503 or 445?
Through you, Chair. The reason it's 500 and not the actual predicted cost based on the historic data is because we recognise that this is a new fee. So we've put in a cost that is actually lower than what it will cost us in this year to undertake those inspections and monitoring activities. The proposal in staircase is up to more of what the average cost would be. So there will be unders and overs in the actual cost against that fee, depending on a range of factors, for example, the consent, the size of the operation, the location of the operation. So unfortunately, there will be unders and overs.
It's just taking that on, human. They just the people who are paying these fees don't understand that. We have to be quite clear about how and why. The other thing that was raised by McGregor Concrete was the move from the catchment team to the compliance team, and the different understanding that those two teams have about river management. They had a comfortable relationship, if you like, with the catchment group, and now they're facing a different team of people who they say do not understand the rivers in the same way, so they're not having a joined up conversation. That's the impression I got from that submission. So do we continue with making it a compliance matter rather than a catchment management matter? I know that we've changed the structure of our organisation, but I thought that was a very valid point that they had.
Through the chair, I agree with the point in terms of being really clear about which division is responsible for which parts, and I think we need to continue to be very clear with them. The catchment team will continue to have a role in gravel management, and so the expertise that sits within my group will continue to be used for that purpose. The proposal as it stands is primarily to address the shortcomings in some of the monitoring resources, I guess, and so the whilst I understand McGregor's submission, it'll play out in the wash when we're actually when the new structure settles in and they see that they're still going to have access in the same way to the catchment operations team to look after how gravel is managed.
Thanks, Lucy. Robert.
Thanks. Yes. So part of the discussion has been around some kind of some kind of relief or some kind of compensation for good work done for the community. I'm fundamentally and ideologically opposed to the idea that a business would be rewarded for what they do anyway by the ratepayer. I can't see the rationale behind that. I don't mean that those organisations, those businesses shouldn't get some kind of relief if that's possible, but for the general ratepayer to pay for that, it's not right. They're a business and they're using a resource which is they're not having to do anything they're not having to grow, they're not having to reinvest back into the resource that they're using. So I don't see it. Some other people may, but I don't see why.
Morris.
Thank you. Well, I think if you take the example of the McGregor Concrete at the Racecourse Bridge, which has been going on for a long time, there is a cost to them to take gravel out of the way that they've been asked to by the Department of Conservation and Fish and Game, so that they enhance the habitat in the river there for birds like dotterels and black-billed gulls, black-billed gulls and black-fronted terns. So there is a benefit of biodiversity gain there for the community. So I don't agree with you, Robert. I think there is a case for encouraging that sort of thing. We've talked about investigating that, and North Canterbury is an example of where that happens already. So I'm keen to get more information on that and how that could be done. I do think that it's fair if we were to do that, if this council was to enhance habitat in a river in the same way that McGregor Concrete are doing, it would cost the ratepayer a huge amount of money. So I think there's a good case for that. The other question I was going to ask has already been asked by Paul, so I don't need to ask that. I think the response. The one question I have is you talk about high risk activities needing more monitoring, and I wonder how you're going to decide which is high risk and which is not.
Excellent question. I might need to refer to Donna for that answer.
Sorry?
I might need to refer to Donna for that answer. I can get her to join if you like.
Through you, Chair, I'd just add as well to Councillor Rodway's question and back to Neville's as well. One of the key intersections between both Hayley's teams and my teams is the technical group, the new technical team within my group will be informing our floodplain management approach, our gravel management approach, how we look from mountains to the sea, and the management of gravel needs to be looked at with that lens. And so part of what's high risk needs to be informed by our strategic intent, as well as what's high risk from an actual monitoring activity perspective. So we could probably take a joint action to get some feedback from both my technical team and also from Hayley's in terms of how we might have a matrix of decision making that sits behind in terms to articulate what is considered to be high risk, because it won't just be about the monitoring side of it.
Well, I think that needs to be communicated to the gravel people, because they need to know, when they're going to be doing something, is it's going to be high risk, so there's going to be more monitoring, or they can modify what they're doing and make it low risk, which would be good.
There would have to be ecological considerations as well as consultative ones, so you would need to do.
Phil, sorry, Mr. Chairman, just one other point. I didn't quite hear that, what you said at the end there, but I'm sure it was right.
Just more consultation, internal consultation, and then bring it back to you in terms of how and where we would determine to be high risk.
Yeah. I do support the comments in there, and I think it's good about making people aware that there's so much talk in the community about gravel in the rivers, and which is reflected there in the response. And so the explanation there about the additional funding required to ensure we have resources to do all of that work, to understand the gravel processes better is really good, so I support that.
Okay, I've got Phil, Eric, Peter, then myself. Phil.
Thank you. I just those average costs only around 800, ranging from 809 to 680 average.
Yeah.
And we're asking 500, so it's actually cost minus rather than cost plus.
Yes.
In that particular instance. And I just flagged that in response to Lloyd McCallum's questions, making sure that that he understands that some of it is cost minus. Of course, that might invite criticism from others that why are other ratepayers subsidising these businesses? I get that, but part of his question was what the customer can stand. I think it's important to emphasise that it's probably inefficient for us to attempt to even analyse at an individual customer level what their business can stand, and so that's actually not an approach that we could even countenance in the future, where it has to be based on a historical understanding and analysis and taking of historical costs and what the community think is reasonable, would be my observation there. So the question is it what the customer can stand is actually not an appropriate way for us to even consider doing business.
Yes, the wording's not good. It sounds like we'll charge as much as we think, rather than having a logical basis, which I'm sure that staff are considering. So I've got Eric, Peter, Neville, with myself.
Thank you, Chair. McGregor Concrete said that they get a consent for 2 to 3 years. Is that accurate? And is there a very good rationale why they should be required to reconsent so regularly, given that their regular nominations for our environmental awards, and Councillor Rodway has extolled some of their practices. Is there not some way that we can have a process that actually extends that for good environmental behaviour or something? It just seemed a little bit illogical that every 2 years they've got to front up and get another consent.
Through you, Chair, there are a range of consent periods that people apply for, up to 10 years. So that may be a decision based on the particulars of the site, which is my understanding. So, for example, we had a really useful discussion with Wilkins, who outlined that often the river moves and they can no longer access a gravel resource which they have consent to extract from. And there are other reasons why they can no longer reach that resource. The resource itself may, through flooding, of course, disappear in part. So that may be part of it. I'm not sure of the specific details of McGregor's consent, but I'm happy to get Lacey to come along to speak to that.
Thank you.
Chief, can I just clarify a point? The McGregor Concrete Limited that have submitted on the fees and charges schedule is based out of Winton and is a separate operation, as I understand it, to the Raised Bush operation.
Peter.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I just want to support what Morris said earlier on. If there is cross benefit that benefits the community in those commercial operations, I think we need to explore that. And I guess it's about, do we see ourselves as an enabler here in this situation, and maybe they could modify their works in the future if there is some sort of cross benefit to not only benefit themselves, and I'll take Robert's point on, it's a commercial operation, let's be really clear about it, but we need all the help we can get with the stuff we have to do in the future. And I think we should first just talk about acknowledging the possibility of this happening would be a good first step. But as Hayley said, it's going to be quite a process to put something like this in place. So yeah, just thank you, Morris. Yeah.
Neville.
I'll just note from Councillor McDonald's comment to that in the paragraph in the staff response that we were considering the waivers.
Yeah.
But I noted on my own papers that Rob Transport questioned the time taken to get a consent and the terms of consent. And I've got down here 5 years. Did he say he'd taken 5 years to get consent? Or did he want a 5 year consent?
Taking them 5.
Yeah. So why would it take that long?
Through you, Chair, I'm not sure of the specific details of that, but I'm happy to get the details of that to the committee from our consents manager.
And I just noted, as I said, Chairman, that the staff narrative on that, on those that staff will consider the suggested waiver clause has merit. It's going to be considered, so I think we need to have a long discussion about that.
Oh, just a couple of comments. I mean, been raised about perhaps a waiver in some cases, because the old private public good. So some of us actually putting a channel along the side, clearing off the gravel so that the bird survival rate is much better. That part of it is a public good. One of the big concerns that came through from the gravel extractors was the time and the cost of actually getting a consent, and that 5 year one is the Ariti one where trial work had to be done on sediment loss for the vehicles crossing the river. But even McGregor saying, I said, is it taking 6 months? And they said it's taking 2 years. So again, this is something coming through the RMA changes is hopefully there's a way of streamlining some of that sort of stuff, because that's why people are digging in the paddocks, because it's a far easier process, and we need to be able to target where we actually need gravel removed. And it's not everywhere, but the bridges is a good example now that we need to be able to encourage contractors to actually make use of that. It's actually going to help our infrastructure and be a win-win situation. I've got Jeremy, then Paul.
Just in regards to the gravel, when we're here listening to this discussion around a waiver, it's very similar to the when I'm thinking not necessarily commercial, but we have examples in regards to the Upper Emma, the reviews down there, and trials down there. And we know there's been quite good benefits. They're willing to do it, benefits under the right conditions. I believe that probably we could be doing a lot of this stuff in a permitted basis under certain conditions with river management. And it doesn't need to be commercial. It's actually private owners have the gear to do this up through these. We could be doing this sort of stuff without a consented basis, well, under a permitted activity, and getting a lot of moving forward quite quickly. It's not about clearing the rivers of all the gravel, but and we have these sort of same, I know we've heard, it's going to be quite a bit of a process. Well, it's only a process if we want to make it hard. If we know there's positive benefits from it, we should be able to make it an easier process. And reflecting on the wetland discussion, we have the same sort of issues. Just a couple of points. So I really sort of agree that we need to make a look at that flavour in some form. A couple of real interesting statistics that they did bring to the table around how much gravel we do use. And we wonder why we have such a problem with roading and things. And you look on the world stage of per capita, how much gravel we do use in New Zealand, and it is quite a phenomenal figure. So we do need the product. Another statistic is that they say that it's actually cheaper just digging a hole not in the river. It's cheaper at this stage. So you've got to say, well, isn't it a logical spot to go and grab your gravel too? If it's cheaper, it should be cheaper for the community, for the roading and everything else. So really some really good data here. I'm just sort of indicating that there's been some really good stuff, but certainly pro understanding how we can actually benefit the community, do a lot more under the permitted activity based on trials that have been sort of proven that they have huge beneficial environmental outcomes from that basis. So.
Paul?
Thank you. It's almost as if Jeremy was reading what I wrote on my page.
Sorry.
Duncan McGregor mentioned regarding the high usage of third highest per capita gravel. But also, I think right at the end, I asked the submitters around the cost of on-land extraction of gravel as opposed to river extraction. And I think it was considerably cheaper, and we don't want to put ourselves in a position where we've got some really good operators doing a lot for the environment, costing a lot of money, and just giving up operations and moving off river. And we'll just be left with, so there's not only environmental returns from a lot of these guys, there's also the gravel extraction. So in a certain way, we are using them for our benefit and for the community's benefit. We don't want to lose that by overcharging when we do that. We want to make sure the monitoring is done correctly, the environmental effects are considered, and that the process is done right, speedy, well.
Right, I've got Robert, and that might be better time to.
I have.
Okay, you reply.
Councillor Rodwell's question.
You just one point about the per capita use of gravel, and it sounds like a great thing, but don't more roads equal more greenhouse gases? And so is that a community good or is that a negative? Just something to think about. We shouldn't just take these things for granted. That's not a question.
Hayley.
Yes, my apologies. I'm dealing with the tail end of a rather nasty cold that seems to be going around the executive. And so my head is a bit brain foggy, which is, I actually knew the answer to Councillor Rodway's question. And it appears in the Regulatory Services Committee agenda for tomorrow. But for those of you that don't have the absolute pleasure of attending that awesome committee, the resource management team have been working with the catchment operations team on that very question around how we define the risk rating for gravel extraction and the monitoring of that. And so they're proposing 3 bands of risks which they will, over the course of a year, be looking at in a quite critical way to make sure that those prove true, should this is something that's acceptable to the committee. The low risk in terms of the parameters are less than 25,000 cubic metres with an inspection frequency biannual. Medium risk is between 25,001 cubic metres to 75,000 cubic metres of gravel extracted, and then an inspection frequency, you can tell from my voice as well, it's a bit croaky, so my apologies, of once per year. And then a high risk is greater than 75,000 cubic metres extracted, and an inspection frequency proposed for that risk rating of twice per year. So during the course of the year, they continue to look at those to move consent holders with communication with consent holders, obviously, between those bands. And that particularly is around whether ongoing non-compliances occur with individual consents. So my apologies for looking completely blank. Blame on the
No problem, thanks. Thanks, Hayley. Right, we'll go back to, is there anything to be added to Lloyd McCallum's? I think some of the information Hayley's going to give us that we actually aren't profiting on that cost recovery is probably something that could go into that. Not 7 pages of
26.
Yeah, it appears we aren't actually making a profit, probably still making a small loss from the analysis you've been doing. So apart from that, anything else to add to the staff commentary for Lord McCallum's submission? Good. Rodrigo Concord, we've had a fairly fulsome discussion. Is there anything more to be added into?
Like this touch on process, Chair. So obviously there's still, as Lucy indicated, we've a bit of work to do around that waiver suggestions. So we will bring that through to the relevant meetings next month. You don't adopt the final fees and charges schedule until the 25th of June. So we'll bring that through as part of the process.
Okay, having heard that, are we happy with?
I think it's a matter of explaining to the submitters why the charges are what they are. I'm not sure you could do that without writing a book, but it has been explained to us on more than one occasion, and we're still asking questions. And just bearing in mind that if we can clarify the cost structure for those submitters, that would be helpful.
It'd be good, and like
everything else you might write.
500, the explanation for $500 charge would be a good one to add to some of those. So we're good with McGregor. We have Ryan Bush.
So this is very similar, and likewise the waiver clause applies here.
The Royal Bush one, Chairman, that was one I raised a point about the time taken to get a consent and the term of consents. That's not been addressed in the staff response.
So it's probably something we can move on.
Sorry, Chair. Royal Bush raised or noted that Environment Canterbury use an approach and with regarding the application management fee. And it says in the staff commentary that this is currently being investigated with the intention of tabling a proposal during deliberations. So are you going to table a proposal during deliberations for us to look at?
So this is the matter that I was just referring to that Lucy commented on earlier, that we haven't got a proposal to table yet. The work's still underway, but we'll bring it back through next month.
And where will it come through?
So the final adoption of the fees and charges schedule will be at the council meeting on the 25th of June. We've currently got a risk and assurance meeting scheduled for the 12th of June, but we are now looking at a finance and performance committee meeting either that day or very close, which would also look at, review it and then make a recommendation to council.
Thank you.
So perhaps that last paragraph needs to change from during deliberations to tabling price to council.
Yes, we'll change that wording.
Anything further on Wild Bush, then move to Alex Hartman, which was similar.
Similar at that end result. The end comment was staff investigating.
Yeah, so it needs all okay.
Proposal during deliberation.
On that one, if not, we'll move to Michelle Lawson.
So Michelle's raising concerns about the increase to white voting fees, and the cover report, the inflation costs. So generally speaking, the fees and charges schedule has just had inflation costs added, except for the gravel charges that we've just been discussing. They were the main change. There was a full review done 2 years ago and another review coming up, more comprehensive review for next year. So it's an inflation adjustment solely at this point.
So perhaps we could add that.
Add a wee bit more on that.
Anything further on that one? Okay, we move to Jenna McCabe.
And a general concern about rising costs. So again, we could add the comment about inflation, but note, I guess, the council does remain focused on affordability, and it's very much part of future reviews as well.
Happy with that addition?
And that the submission was around fees, not rates. For number 3, Gina.
Right, Dylan Ag Limited.
So this is another gravel related submission. So covers a number of matters around consenting for gravel extraction activities, and then expresses a general concern about increases to rates. So the team have provided a response to those matters.
Are we happy with that response? Is there anything out of previous ones needs to be added, or?
Mr. Chairman, nobody else has any questions. This sort of relates back to whether or not this is a benefit or not to the community. That Dylan's would argue that it does, and so there maybe should be some consideration of that, because they're not like the regular gravel companies. They say they're doing it to stop the river from flowing, washing away the bridge there at Ailsa.
This might be another one where we should mention the waiver, potential waiver, depending on where the council goes with that.
Chairman, could just, sorry, Mr. Chairman, also possibly mention the environmental portion of that as well. Not just, that's why we charge that quality consent. Some of it is to make sure that habits aren't bad.
Right, about Neville and Jeremy.
Yeah, Chairman, yeah, we've discussed this waiver about 17 times so far. The point is somebody has to pay for our costs, and their charges and fees are set on a cost recovery basis. So it's all very well to say, yes, we'll give these some of these consent holders a waiver and we won't charge them as much, but somebody has to pay, otherwise we're running in deficit. So it's not as, you know, it might feel nice, but there's a practicality about it.
The gravel royalty, I think, is Maureen's covering that, isn't it? Jeremy.
Just in regards to the Dylan submission, Michelle, does their issue around our permitted activity clearing around infrastructure or the Southern District Council, some of these would actually fall into that category, that it's actually the council could clear that. Is that correct? I'm just asking that there is other rules out there.
Yeah, through you, Chair. We'll jump in as well, but yes, there's permitted activity rules for the maintenance of infrastructure, which sits with the TAs, including Southern District Council. So where they have those permitted activities or consents already in place, the onus is upon them to maintain their assets.
In their consent, in their situation, because we know we've been on that bridge, that may actually cover it. We should look at that as an option for the future.
Morris.
Information on that permitted activity status is for the Kotahi or the district council. It's not available for an individual, is it?
No, through you, Chair. So the permitted activities obviously comes with a number of conditions, but it's primarily for the maintenance of infrastructure by the infrastructure owners. So yes, Whakatahi and SDC would be two of those owners. Kiwi Rail would be another. I was just saying quietly to Hayley, I'm not 100% sure if this submitted the bridge that's referenced here, whether it's a private one or a Kotahi one, a state highway one. I'm not 100% sure, but we can find out who owns the bridge, and then it would be the consenting team to obviously follow up with the submitters on whether or not there's other routes by which the infrastructure.
Oh, it's quite important road, so probably district council.
I think it is district council, and after conversations with the community board up there, the district council did have working with the Dillons, have been actually taking some of that gravel out, which was a bit of a win-win situation. Anything further on the Dillon? That sounds like a much slight addition to that wording. If not, we'll move to Paul Burke.
So the next three submitters all raising concerns about rising costs essentially. So the recommendation is the council thanks the submitter for their submission and notes the submitter's comments. Again, we could add the sort of inflation comments that we discussed previously. And affordability being a constant focus.
Phil.
I'm just wondering, Rachel, if within that expressing the fact that we're in respect to fees, it's very much a user pays approach, which arguably is addressing affordability for the wider community of ratepayers. Potentially helpful.
Okay, we're happy with that response to those three. We'll move to Lindsay Beard.
So this is relating to the gravel fee as well, and objecting to paying an inspection fee. So there's some wording there around the risk-based approach that Hayley's outlined.
Neville.
So if somebody's unable to exercise their consent and they've decided they don't want to surrender it, what are we doing? What are we doing that means that we have to charge them fees? We're not using it. Yeah, I'm speaking from their perspective. How fair is that?
Through you, Chair. I mean, consents do still need monitoring. We do work with consent holders where this happens to suggest to them, particularly where there's not much left in terms of the period of their consent, to suggest that they may wish to consider surrendering their consent so as to avoid this ongoing monitoring, which is a requirement of their condition.
I think the comment that it's a low risk, they might have a biannual inspection would probably solve some of those things. We've got a private consent, and they may not be gravel every year, but every second year they might. So that's looks to be reasonable and covered. Any questions or additions to the staff response? That's good. Now we'll move to Annette Horrell.
Another submission around the proposed gravel monitoring fee and a response that's similar to previous responses.
I wonder if that one could have that biannual thing if they're only intermittent. As well, because they are quite similar in that regard, aren't they? But it's
just been reading again, this appears in quite a few of these about the need to understand the gravel the gravel management. A lot of these people who make these submissions think that the rivers are a conveyor belt of gravel. Gravel's coming down all the time, a huge amount, and unless you dig a huge amount of it out, you're going to have a massive problem. That's not the case, as far as I understand it anyway. So that I wonder if it might not be sensible, but whether we could expand a bit on, get Ian Fuller to talk a little bit about gravel and say, well, what is the gravel resource, and how you talk about the high risk. We'll talk about this tomorrow at regulatory committee, but 75,000 metres of gravel taken out of one of our rivers is a huge amount of gravel. It's far more than what that river will be transporting in a year. And so I'm just saying, Mr. Chairman, I think that while the words are good, maybe we might try to make a better attempt at explaining the risks of inappropriate gravel extraction in our rivers. If you think it's, I suppose you get to talk about this all the time, and people who take gravel or have that sort of conversation with them, I guess, so whether it's really necessary. But I think it's really important for us to understand that. I'm sure that we hope that we do. There's not an inexhaustible supply. When we found the Mataura River was actually degrading, that's why back in the day, it was probably 20 years ago now, when Henry Hudson was employed to give advice, and he found by doing cross sections in the Lower Mataura that the river was degrading, and so he had to stop taking gravel out of it, except in a few localised places. So my impression is that people in the community think that the gravel needs to be dug out of the rivers all the time, and that's simply not the case, and that is something that we need to educate the community about more effectively, I think.
Through you, Chair, there is some information up on their website, I believe, that we could potentially reference here. I think it would be quite helpful. Yeah.
Okay.
Phil.
Thank you, Chair. Just wondering if, adding to Morris's thoughts, that perhaps, and maybe in people's minds, they're imagining that we are monitoring and managing the potential for risk at a local level, which is probably a valid concern in part. But I think what Morris is speaking to is that we've understood there is a risk at a catchment level, and we need to understand gravel budgets across the entire catchment. And that's part of what we're contributing to by understanding the effect of the local site. We're understanding how it connects across the system to our gravel budgets, sediment budgets, and maybe highlighting that it's just not about the localised risks, but the risks to the catchment system is an emerging and growing concern for us. Maybe that could be cleverly woven into the succinct summary by clever staff.
I think in these two cases, the extraction is quite small, and I'm sure it will be covered by the consents that they can't over extract. But a little bit more detail wouldn't hurt. Yeah.
Chair, just add to Rachel's answer and also to Councillor Morrison's point, I think we can definitely expand out the fact that the management of gravel isn't fully localised, it's not site specific. We need to be moving towards an integrated approach to how we manage gravel throughout our systems, and that's partially to do with risk, but it's also partially to do with how we manage floodplains more joined up with catchment. So there is definitely some succinct words we can put in there, either from Professor Fuller or as Rachel was mentioned, from the website in terms of what the gravel management is.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, we're happy with that one. Last but not the least, Walkins Farming Company, Cedar Crooks.
Again, this submission relates to gravel monitoring fees, and again, the response is largely the same. They have raised a point around freshwater farm plan charges, and there's a specific response to that in that third bullet point.
Peter?
Yeah, just, seems the submissions on gravel too, but just to address the last thing that Morris was saying, Phil was saying, we do have a resource there. It's called the Gravel Working Group, which is in play. It's a fully collaborative group from both ends of the discussion, you say, or argument. We should be empowering them more to put those messages out there that Morris and Phil were talking about. We had it with the regional forum too. So we should be thinking about that too.
Okay. Yeah,
Chair, the last point on that, on the final submission there in terms of the proposal for the waiver will just reflect the change that we've been talking about so that it's consistent all the way through.
Linda, were you in?
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Okay. Reasonably happy with staff response? Okay. Okay.
Takes us back to the main report and the recommendations on page 27. So the next, so we've already gone through recommendations 1 to 3, you will recall. The next recommendation 4 is the wrap up of the river management funding review. So you need to now agree to one of the options. So you'll recall option 1 was your preferred option when we went out for consultation. But there are other options, options 2 and 3, or an option you would like to put forward based on submitted feedback.
Okay, well, I'll start off. I think having heard the submissions, the majority are supporting the regional rate. There's a small number that aren't, but the information that we have received is suggesting that is the most equitable way of doing it. So that's where I sit on this one. Perhaps we'll go around the table and see where everybody is. We'll start here. Jeremy, you can go around.
Just quickly going down the agenda here. Yeah, look, I'm very comfortable with option 1. Obviously, duly noting there's a few questions need to be asked, and then in due course we'll hopefully be able to give the confidence in the community that we're doing what we're saying. So comfortable with that.
Yeah, I'm supportive of option 1, and I'm cognizant of the fact that the proposals were put out there and only a limited number of people suggested option 2 or option 3. So I think there's quite a significant support for option 1 in the community.
Robert?
Yeah, I feel similarly, if not the same.
Peter?
Yeah, I support option 1, mainly for the reason and limited resources for this council to operate regionally. I think inefficiently. I think that is a prime concern of mine, which draws me towards option 1.
Neville?
Taking a regional view, Chairman, option 1 is to me the obvious one to choose. That's why we put it out there as our preferred option.
John?
Yeah, option 1. Current situation's hamstringing our ability to get on and do what we need to do for the community, and all I can see by and large is supported by the community.
Phil?
I support option 1. I acknowledge that there's no perfect solution and that some will be unhappy with that. I think some of the concerns shared by those who don't support option 1, the onus is on us through other mechanisms to respond to some of those concerns, including representation, transparency around expenditure. But in summary, option 1 is one that I support.
Lyndall?
Option 1, Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I just wonder whether you need to say in there though that this doesn't apply to the Waiau catchment. Is that option one, is that taken as being part of it?
Yes, in the documentation, it's very clear it excludes the Waiau catchment,
Right.
but if you wish to.
Thank you. For transparency, it wouldn't hurt to do that. So we actually have, of course,
I believe option one's our best one, at this time. No doubt the option it is replacing was the best option at that time. So we can leave it for future councils to change if they desire option one.
we appear to have a unanimous support for it. We better have somebody move and second. Moved by Neville, seconded by Paul. All in favour, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, we'll move to 5.
Through you, Chair, can I suggest a amendment to this particular recommendation, given that we haven't tabled a waiver clause for your consideration today? I'd suggest this is reworded to direct staff to draft a waiver clause to the 2025-26 fees and charges schedule based on council deliberations on submitted feedback. And obviously that waiver clause is relating specifically to gravel management, and then that would flow through when you adopt the final schedule. So you would consider that waiver clause and then agree to include it or not include it when you adopt the schedule.
I would agree with that. Have you got the wording there?
Direct staff to address the waiver clause relating to gravel management for the 25-26 fees and charges schedule based on council deliberations on submitted feedback.
Having heard the amendment, do we have any further discussion? If not, would somebody like to move? Moved by Neville, seconded by Paul. All in favour will say aye.
Aye.
Right, 6 is direct staff to prepare a final draft of the 25-26 fees and charges schedule to bring it back to council for approval. And I guess that measures in with have that other information before we do that. So reasonably straightforward. So moved by Lyndall, seconded by Phil. All in favour say aye.
Aye.
7 is direct staff to prepare. Moved by Eric, seconded by Morris. For discussion, I'll put the recommendation. All in favour say aye. Aye. And then number 8 is direct staff to prepare responses to submitters based on council deliberations. I'll move, Mr. Chairman. Moved by Morris, seconded by Lyndall. All in favour will say aye.
Aye.
Well, we don't have any extraordinary or urgent business or public excluded. On that note, I can thank you for your consideration of the submissions during deliberations and declare the meeting closed.
Councillors, can I just remind you that we've got a 9 o'clock start